You are watching The Art of Save Scumming, and we're doing more Skaven content today. I know that I've been kind of on a Skaven kick lately. I've got a few more things for Molder to wrap up, and then I've got 2 videos specifically that I want to work on that deal with difficult factions to fight when it comes to playing as the Skaven. And those 2 factions are the Chaos Dwarves and the OG High Elves, and this is, of course, as of August 2023. So if you're watching this in the future, then there may be some more things added, but right now, those are the 2 factions that the Skaven, it's not impossible to fight, but they are the hardest factions to deal with when it comes to Skaven. And there are very simple reasons why it is difficult for the Skaven to fight the High Elves. First, they are a very wealthy race, so they can pump out a whole lot of armies. Look at this over here. We've got elite armies, not full stacks, but we have 2 full stacks there. Avalorn's got some more stacks there. We got armies all over the place, right? So that can be a problem as far as their riches are concerned. The second problem is they're difficult to invade. All the Ulthuan territory, except for the small area up in the northwestern part of Ulthuan, is uninhabitable territory. So that means that if you take this territory, it's going to revolt constantly, and it's going to be difficult to recruit out of. So you should not consider territory on Ulthuan, except for those few regions, viable territory to launch attacks from. You're going to have to do it from somewhere else. And then lastly, the big problem with the High Elves is you are outclassed. They are going to out-leadership you every single time. Of course, that is a continuous theme when it comes to Skaven, but they also have scary monsters that can cause your people to terror rout. So that is something you have to take into account. You will not fight optimally against High Elves. They also outrange you. There are some exceptions to that. You have far-reaching artillery, and your Jezzails shoot really well, but if you spam those units and do not build a balanced weapons team to deal with them, then they're going to just annihilate you with other army compositions. They're still going to be able to outshoot you because their base archers outrange most of your units. Level 1 archers are, even in the late game, hard to deal with for the Skaven, so that's something that you have to consider. So let's go back to the first thing that we should do, which is not occupy their territory, not recruit out of their territory because it's just difficult to do. And that means you're going to have to set up a recruitment zone and a place to launch your invasion. And for that, I suggest that you take over Bretonnia. Now, the only one that is an exception to that would be Lord Skrulk, which is down here in Lustria, and his attack angle is going to be completely different than everybody else who is a Skaven. He should come up this way and then launch his attack on the High Elves through the means that we discussed earlier. Everybody else is going to have an avenue through Bretonnia. After you've occupied Bretonnia, you need to make Bretonnia defensible. And that means building defensive buildings in all the coastal regions. So if it has a port, if it touches the ocean, then you need to build a defensive building in that region. So all of these spaces have defensive buildings in them for the purposes of making them defensible against the High Elf launching attacks. On top of that, you can build defensive armies in those regions to keep the High Elves out. So if they do decide to launch an attack in the region, then you can put that army in ambush stance, set it there, they'll send a smaller force over, and you can crush it. This is a good defensive setup for fighting against High Elves, in addition to having a garrison that you can send out there. That's a pretty healthy garrison. You can stack that in front of this army. There's a whole lot of shields, some artillery. Well, it's not actually artillery. They're mortars and some counter battery fire here. There's lots of magic in this army as well. So this is a army for defensive purposes. Fighting them offensively, however, is completely different. For that, you need to build 2 types of armies: expendable armies and killers. So if we take a look at an expendable army, this would be an expendable army. Lots of shields, some damage dealers, but the majority of the damage dealers in this army are going to be the casters. So I don't know why this guy is level 3, but should be higher level than that. I can recruit much higher. He must be one of the first lords that I recruited and never put back. But regardless, you're sending casters in there with an expendable army. The casters do a lot of damage, and the army itself just envelops the High Elf army and attacks key targets, things like archers and artillery. You want to take those out because, as I mentioned, even the level 1 archers for the High Elves can do substantial damage to your weapons team's armies. So the idea is that you use this army for 2 purposes: to set up an ambush trap, and or use this army to first attack the High Elf army that is in most ways superior to yours, target key targets, and ultimately lose. This army is meant to lose. After you've done that damage, you attack with something like this full weapons team over here. It takes time for the mortars, the Jezzails, and the artillery to wipe out all the archers. So if you can do more damage to them before you ever get in that engagement, all the better. So after you have set up your defensive perimeter here, and you've started to build all of your armies, you can see they've got multiple waves here. I've got a couple weapons teams in the build. Here I've got some more expendable armies. I've got a couple defensive armies. I've started to make landfall over here. You want to pick a spot to set up a beachhead. And my suggestion would be Misnar here, because you have a 1-turn jump across from Lyonesse. Any army that is stationed here can attack Misnar and take it on the same turn. Once you have taken that position, you can then very easily start shipping more armies over. You want to port to be able to land your armies so they don't lose any of their movement over the next turn. You can see that this army here is the one that took it, and they don't have a whole lot of movement on their next turn. All I did for this army was move it into a position to ambush. That army depleted all of its movement that turn when it took it. This is the next turn. It can't go a whole lot of places, but I've started to move some of our expendable armies over here to start taking up refuge. It also doesn't hurt that Bellicor has moved on to the continent here, and he is doing some damage. He is a defensive ally. That is something to leverage. Prior to your invasion, you should send an elite army over to do damage to their economy. You can see here that there's some undercities that are set up. It came over right here. I found an opening on Trilinia, went through here, blew up some cities, and worked myself through here, setting up some undercities, came up through here, and now my army is over here. And this is the elite army that I used. You can use a weapons team for this, but this was a little less expensive than a full weapons team. The purpose of this is to damage their economy, and also to try to divert some of their armies away from your invasion force. Because, as you can see, they can recruit a crap ton of armies. So it's nice if you can have some of those armies chasing you around the Holy Donut. Another good way to do that is to set up a few cities that you do not intend to keep whatsoever. This one would be a loss city. And the idea is this is far away from their armies, but they know it's there, so they're going to divert some armies to go take this position, and those are armies that are sitting there not waiting to take on any of my invasion force. Once you get your invasion force on Ulthuan, it's pretty much game over. You just do ambush trap and that wave attack that I told you about, and you'll be fine. As far as individual battle tactics are concerned, your artillery is superior to the High Elves in every single way. Your warped lightning cannons are great at taking down large entities like dragons and phoenixes, and your plague claw catapults are anti-infantry murderers. I suggest that you take a mix of both, not necessarily in the same army, but across your armies. You want to have both units on Ulthuan when you get there, in case you run up against a whole bunch of monsters, because a lot of what you're going to face is infantry. You are going to have to do a fair amount of ranged micro to combat the High Elves, because they are going to be very ranged heavy in their armies, and one of the units I prefer to use to do that is the Poison Wind Mortar, because it matches the base archers range pretty well, and it will give you an additional unit to be able to target those and speed up the process of eliminating that back line. Of course, you can use your Plague Claw catapults to do this, but there are some instances where the Poison Wind Mortar just outperforms it. The Warp Lightning Cannon is less effective against archers simply because it just punches right through the line and only takes out a few units. As far as taking on those flying monsters are concerned, make sure that you have the means to shoot those down, because you don't have any flying counters for those. So rattling guns, Jezzails, warp lightning cannons, things like that are really good at that. In addition to those units, make sure that you have at least one, if not more, of the following units. A Warlock Master, a Warlock Engineer, or a Grey Seer of Ruin, all of which you should rush 2 points into Howling Warp Gale. This is one of the few spells that I overcast because it gives an extended duration that allows you to lock a flying unit in an area effect into place and focus fire it down. Make sure that your food infrastructure is well established across the campaign map so that you can afford to order up max Menace Belows whenever you want to. You can drop these down on artillery units to tie them down, or key archer units. A unit of Clan Rats is not going to defeat a Sisters of Avalorn unit in melee combat. In fact, it will lose quite handedly and do very little damage. It will, however, tie up that unit and prevent it from firing its armor-piercing magic missiles into the rest of your army, giving you time to bring a more potent unit to bear on it. The last thing I'm going to leave you with today is something that is applicable to every matchup that you're going to have in this game, but is doubly so when we're talking about Skaven versus High Elves, and that is to make sure that you have a more than sufficient number of scouts. You need them to see what's going on with the enemy armies, uncover potential ambushes, and then also perform gratuitous amounts of support actions on the campaign map, because the High Elves are going to throw a whole bunch of stuff at you. The Skaven end up with a large amount of campaign movement range. One of the things that they use to great effect, though, is their underway stance. This is disabled on Alth 1, so you're going to need those agents there to make sure that you're not walking into a trap. Hamstring those armies before you take them on, and eliminate those key characters that can wreak havoc on your armies when you actually go to battle.